All right. So, hi, everybody. It's Steve Falcon Napier. Welcome to the Circle of Brilliance. Today, we're starting a new topic, and that's the question of the existence of universal human values, universal human beliefs, behaviors. Are there, what, if any, sort of thoughts, feelings, behaviors are absolutely consistent across all of humanity for all of history? I don't know if there really are any, but certainly plenty of people have put forth their thoughts on the subject. And I just wanted to show you what happens. Oh, hey, Mark Parker's on the call. Hey, Mark. Um, so you're welcome to unmute and chime in. So yeah, a lot of people have thrown in their thoughts on the subject of consistent human values. And so I thought, you know what, I'm going to do a little bit of a Google search. So I just typed in essential values throughout humanity in my Google search, and this is basically what's come up. So the Humanics Institute lists these essential values, not so many, but this one does something different. Here's the graphic. I'll show you the world's most influential values in one graphic. There are just 10 basic values. Someone else says, here's over 200 personal values. Here's 6 values. Here's a bunch of pictures. And there was one other one. Let's see if I can find it for you. Just one second. Let me scoot this out of the way. See if I can find this. Why does it keep asking me if I'm a robot? Oh, yeah, I like this one too. No, there was one that said it's the only list of 216 values you'll ever need. Like, so I need 216 values. What's this all about? So obviously there are a lot of thoughts around the subject matter. And so I thought, well, we can, if we want, grab one of those and start looking at it. But I thought in the time we live in, let's just go to Chat GPT and let Chat GPT do it for us. So
There
I
you go.
so I said, hey, Chat, could you please give me a list of human values? And it came up with 24 values that were consistent across all of the resources that ChatGPT had available to it. And it was interesting to kind of then go in and spot check and see that a great many of these were discovered within these other articles. So more and more, I'm kind of, instead of Googling something that I'm curious about, more and more, I'm just going and asking ChatGPT. Everyone just remember, if you are a user of ChatGPT or a similar artificial intelligence kind of an application, just know that their databases, or what they call their, oh, what's their word for it? Their corpus of knowledge is not necessary up to this very moment. ChatGPT, if I'm not mistaken, has a cutoff date of last summer sometime. So anything that happened after last summer is not in its body of knowledge. So just always be aware of that. If you're looking for something very recent, like I know Linda was going to one of her book clubs, and she was curious to see what Chat GPT had to say about some, key points in whatever the book. And because the book was published after that date, Chat GPT had no knowledge of it whatsoever. Anyway, so I like this kind of list here. I thought I would send this over to you guys when we get to the point of discussion there. But I also stumbled across this graphic, and the graphic is, where did I put it? This graphic is right. Drum roll, everybody. Thank you. So appreciate it. I'm about to chat this over to everybody. It's quite a long graphic, but I think you're going to really find it interesting when you do open it up. And it does say that these are the most influential values. So they're coming at it from perhaps a slightly different angle, but nevertheless, there's a very interesting graphic that, if you guys want to open it up, we can have some fun taking our own peek at it and see what it's sharing with us. Just one moment. I'm trying to get it to show up on my screen. Here it is. So, what do we care about the most? Neuroscientists, psychologists, sociologists agree. Our values are determined determine everything we do. Some values are consistently important everywhere on Earth, while the importance of others varies. So again, we're looking for things that are universal. So depending on the degree to which the degree to which it was encountered, if it's variable, then we might say, nah, whatever. But this was based on a robust analysis of 500,000 surveys in 152 languages, and they came up with 56 values that all drive human behavior. I don't know that these are listed in any particular order. I suspect they're not, but maybe by the end of it, they'll say, why do they put family first? Well, and it may be, they say the world average is this dotted line, and pretty much everyone is in the same spot. Maybe that's what this is the most commonly sort of encountered. For some reason, Africa is just slightly below the world average. 5 out of 9 regions ranked family as their highest core value. So that's interesting. And we can go through community. Some rated community a bit higher than the world average. Africa and Central South America are slightly above the line. A lot of us are below. North America, and yeah, I think is actually the lowest. I'd have to see the actual numbers to know, but China and North America seem to put less value on community. Loyalty seems to be very strong if you look at this, Central America, Central and South America, the Middle East for sure. Look at that above the line. The rest of Asia, other than China, is also above the line. So that's interesting. Now, if they're going to do all 56 of these, we can really spend a good long time doing this. But freedom of speech, I thought, was an interesting one because look at how far above the world average we are. And again, this is for valuing something. North America and the Middle East are certainly up there. Then, Europe not all that far behind for that. Respect. The world average is the dotted line again. Africa and South or Central America put it higher than anywhere else in the world. So North America, Europe is really at the bottom of this pile of the 5. You guys finding any of this interesting? Yeah.
Very.
Yeah, have something to.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now I will tell you that I think this is really interesting. I didn't think there'd end up being so many that people are insisting are really strong values across all of humanity. And again, I wanted all of humanity across all of history. So we know what really is essential to the makeup of a human being. Authority. China fell close behind North America and the Middle East in its ranking of authority. Huh. Tradition, North America and Europe quite low on tradition compared to Central and South America, the highest in traditions. All right, so as you start seeing these kinds of spread, righteousness, look at that. China's way above everyone else. And looks like Central and South America is at the bottom of the range there. So you start to wonder, well, if there is this broad of a reporting across these different regions, are these really essential, universal, or not so much? What do you guys think? Yes, no?
I'm thinking maybe not so much in that some of these countries that I've lived in, these dynamics may be based on old conditioning, but those things are being challenged now. I think it was I forget the president's name, but he said every generation, starts their own revolution. And that's
Oh,
this
mhm.
shift that we're seeing now in countries like Iraq, Iran, different countries like that, that they're challenging some of these old
Right.
conditionings.
Yeah, I was wondering, what is the date on this little study? Does it tell us? Okay, 3 years ago, 2020. So,
Yeah.
I'm also wondering what the range is there when it shows, they got the average, and then if you look at the lowest to the highest, Is that,
Yeah.
what's the
Well, I
standard
would,
deviation? Is it a standard deviation they're showing?
yeah,
Or what kind of
that'd be
range are they
very
showing?
interesting to look at because this is just the infographic they publish. But I gotta believe if we do some digging, that they also have the research itself that we could
Well, yeah,
do.
and if they're going to call it influential, then the range might be small.
Right, right. And again, it's influential values, and I was kind of more interested in just general life values. Unless they're saying that these are the values that influence people the most at that cultural or regional kind of level. How are they describing these uh,
Right. Plus,
regions?
I had difficulty with when I was looking this up. I had difficulty with, um, and I don't want to play, make the semantics like too difficult. But I was trying to differentiate between, or is there differentiation between values that are universal and value, meaning the meaning of that and how it plays out that benefits everyone. Because in
Mhm.
Dr. Robert Hartman's work in axiology, which is the formal name for value science, says there is a distinction between the two. So when I was looking this up and then I seen the 10 or the 5, that made it kind of definitive. And I had difficulty with like digesting that, if you will. So
Mhm.
I didn't even know where to start this exploration, to be quite honest. That's why I
And
asked
so
if
that's it.
you
So
have a.
how do you define for yourself the difference between values and value?
Well, Dr. Hartman's work, I think, gives some indication. I tend to agree with that just based on the neuroscience of how we condition ourselves based on identity and things that
Hmm.
are strong based on our experience, right? So he distinguished values as those are personal things that we create a
Hmm.
hierarchical kind of nature to. So, for instance, we'll say family's at the top of my list,
Yeah.
but that person could be a workaholic. So those become malaligned, so-called personal
Right.
value,
There's a disconnect.
a
Right.
disconnect. So he said valuing, meaning creating meaning in the moment, and then exercising value judgment based on the other two, the values and values. He said that's where the rubber meets the road. So it's not just
Yeah.
our values alone. So what that says to me is there's this integration of things that are happening for us to apply so-called values. And that's kind of like how the human body performs, right? It's
Yeah.
this internal and external kind of dynamic relationship. So I had difficulty trying to even begin
Yeah.
that
And so
exploration.
if we said, well, I understand that we might say these are values because you're saying there's a disconnect between what people present as values that they hold near and dear and their behavior. So,
Right.
is this whole concept of values that humanity shares just kind of like in an idealized kind of world rather than it being like the real world and saying, like, here is the evidence based um, outcome of the study of what people value. So it's like, we really are going like, no, this is behaviorally, this is what they end up valuing, regardless of what they say. This is what they seem to actually do.
Right.
Is that I got to believe that's going to be different than this idealized version of what these human universal values might be.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
thoughts
Yeah.
about that? Yep. All right, now it is interesting to me, and this does resonate with everything else that I've looked at, is that family is kind of top on the list. So and maybe that's just something that's being driven more by our genetics, our neurochemistry, because we're talking about the bond between parents and the child. And that then extends to the whole family as there's multiple children and siblings and all that sort of stuff. I got to believe that that's something that's kind of locked into humans, just the way, whether it's a maternal instinct, a paternal instinct, whatever it is, that just feels like it's something that's part and parcel of our uh, way we end up procreating.
Mhm.
So, I mean, that seems like that's governed by something. I don't know if it's genetics, I don't know if it's chemical or whatever, but that one everyone seems to agree on. that we
Right.
value our offspring.
Hey, T, excuse me, T, I think this is interesting, and I think it also is very complex.
Hmm.
I do an exercise in the programs uh, where we actually do, it leads to this whole conversation around values and how we may apply it. And so there's an exercise we call Four Friends, where we give a short bio on four different characters. And we ask folks to identify or select which would they most want to be and which would they least want to be. And then we talk about the why. Well,
Mm,
one of the characters is an alcoholic father living with two small children in his car.
okay.
And what's interesting is that a lot of people will say that is the one that I would least want to be.
Hmm.
And the reason that they give is they say things like, well, I'm a parent. And I just cannot imagine that he would have those children in that kind of a situation.
Mm,
And
mhm.
that's why I said that that would be the least of the four that I would want to be. Versus others who would say, well, Tim, that's the one that I would most want to be of these four. And the reason is because I'm a parent. And I can appreciate that in spite of the fact that he's dealing with the substance abuse, he loves those children enough that he shelters them, even if it means being in a car. And
Mhm.
so they're both applying the value of family, but that application comes across a little differently. And so,
Right.
this is real interesting to me as I'm looking through this. Uh, and I think the other piece is generational.
Hmm.
When you factor that in around values and how some folks in younger generations may rank things a bit differently than their parents' generation or their grandparents' generation.
Mhm,
Right.
mhm.
And then the experience of those things. So there's an interesting book titled Quantum Changes: When Epiphanies and Sudden Insights Transform Ordinary Lives. And in that book, they compare values of men and women before a quantum moment, and they define the characteristics of what a quantum moment is, and then after. And if I remember correctly, the top five for men in terms of values, because they say they're in the ego and the ambition, time, and things that they value more. So before the shift, they value money, wealth, as one, sense of adventure, sense of achievement, personal pleasure, to be respected. But then after a quantum shift, this awakening happening. Now that turns into spirituality, relationships to God, uh, personal peace, family, God's will, and honesty. And what was interesting, women before the shift valued family, sense of independence, career, fitting in, and being attractive. After the shift, he says personal growth, self esteem, sense of spirituality, happiness, generosity.
And to what do
So
they attribute the shift?
that shift, he says, is this quantum moment that really shifts your perceptions and your perspective of life, because he quantifies or
Mhm.
characterizes quantum moments as something that's vivid and intense.
Yeah,
And
and that's
once
why
you
I'm
ex
wondering, like, did they specify what this quantum moment was that ended up changing this frame?
he gives some examples in the book in terms of like how these people whom they surveyed, like the experience shifted them. And that's a
Yeah.
real
Yeah.
thing because we
Well,
see that a lot.
I think it'd be interesting to explore because, building on what Tim was saying, yeah, people do have their individual values that may or may not align with their family values, which may or may not align with community values, which may or may not align with societal or universal. So everyone's got their own little set, and the set of values that they have are in turn impacted by whatever biases they have, whatever logical fallacies they tend to fall into. It's got to be greatly influenced by how you are nurtured, who your role models are. I mean, your cultures, and we've talked about before that no one of us is a member of only one culture. We
Right.
are all part of multiple cultures. So our family has a culture, our business has a culture, our community has its own culture, and we're constantly modifying ourselves, abbreviating ourselves, whatever, so that we can present the version of us that best matches the culture that we are finding ourselves in any given moment in time. So you start to wonder, are there even any universal values inside of that individual? I mean, that are truly governing their behavior, or is this whole concept of values nothing more than an idealized version of what humanity should be?
Yeah, I started to think just based on, like I say, by the time I was 16 and moved around, my father was World Health Organization, lived in 9 countries on 4 continents. And I started to believe for myself that it's a continuum because I know my own values have shifted.
Yep, yep,
Yeah.
yep, yep. And your values can change. In fact, we talked a lot about this. Even we're talking about personal growth and development. Sometimes people change because something happened. And in that moment, everything about their world changed. So we would describe that as a gross pattern interrupt from the world of neurolinguistic programming. But he would describe that as, what was his words again?
He called them quantum changes. Yeah.
Quantum changes. So some real disruption occurred and it triggered a transformation. Where other changes, I'm sure, are very slow and subtle and maybe even imperceptible until you're looking back, over the course of your life or history and go like, oh wow, my thoughts and my values really did change. So we're constantly being influenced. So, but going back to this idea about universal, and by the way, I'm perfectly fine if by the end of this, the answer is we as the circle of brilliance really have a giant question mark about whether or not truly universal values do exist or not. But if we just look at this infographic, and I just want to scroll through it rather quickly, I'm wondering if family is first because it's the one where you have the greatest agreement across all these different areas. Again, that resonates. Community might seem a little bit tight, loyalty might seem a bit tight, but then freedom of speech starts to jump. Now we're above the line. Isn't that funny how everyone says that they rate freedom of speech higher than the world average, but they have to become the world average, right? I mean, where'd they get the average from? Going back to Pamela's question, I need to see
Yeah.
the structure of the research. So, okay, here you got respect, authority. I'm not seeing anything as I just scroll through this where there is consensus, even among the 9 regions that were surveyed for these. Like, why does Central and South America rank morality so much lower? And look at the Middle East. So these two are talk about put them at the same table and talk about any moral issue, and I'm sure it's going to be very animated. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, it keeps going through different ways of looking at it, windows of insight. But anyway, I thought that was an interesting little graphic for you guys to
Yeah,
be looking
I was
at.
going to comment too, when we do cross-cultural work, there have been value categories that have been identified through corporate research over the years that we have used, and it's all about a value continuum and comparative values continuum, and so there. I mean, I'm not sure, how many actual universal values there really are around the world. But in particular, they certainly are not shared the same way, and they're not even defined the same way. I mean, I think what's
Yeah.
interesting is how someone might define morality in one culture is extremely different than how they might define it somewhere else. And that's why I think, you're going to find those differences. And it doesn't mean that one culture is immoral and one isn't. It just means that they define it really differently. So, I think the interesting thing, I'm sure you're all familiar with that notion of SCARF, the neuroscience concept of, for the brain, what do humans need? What are human needs around status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness? And so that's another piece that's there, although I don't know how much of that is Western, based on Western research or not. So there's a lot of there's, you know, I don't think it's very clear. And I think that the value categories do exist across cultures, but how they're expressed are extremely different, and how they're defined are extremely different.
So
Okay.
Kathy, would you say that even within cultures, have you seen that the values are expressed uniquely different even within various cultures?
Yeah, I mean, it just depends. I think generational differences are there. I think there is a normative cluster, which is what defines culture, you know? So there's a normative cluster around how people define certain value sets, and that's what helps define it as a culture. Um,
Yep.
but it doesn't mean there aren't outliers everywhere, whether that's generational, whether it has to do with power and authority. I mean, there's a whole range of different things, but that is what defines culture, is that sort of normative cluster of agreement around certain values and what those actually mean.
Yeah, that's good.
So, you know, again, as we look at these and talk about how prevalent cultural distinctions might be, regional distinctions. For example, I promise you, if you live in the desert, you put a much greater value on things like conservation of water than you probably do if you live in a tropical rainforest. So, you know, it's a lot of it's got to be dictated by the region that you're in, by the culture that you're focusing in at that particular point in time. So, by what generation you're part of, that I completely agree with. And so I just go back to this thing like, is there anything that is truly essential to the human experience that all feel? And so again, where's this coming from? Is we're saying like, well, if each of us have our own change grid, for those who haven't been on the calls we've been doing recently on the grand change grid of life and on the change cube, basically what we've been chatting about is this rather simple concept that whatever our life is, whatever our personal change grid may look like, however we define each one of these extreme points based on our life experiences and our thought processes, we are but a subset of the possibilities that exist in the entire universe. So our idea at the individual level of a very outgrid activity could be mild compared to what other people's ideas of a real outgrid activity is. And same true for upgrade, ingrid, and downgrid. So our grid, even if we say, well, you know, I don't think I'm that small of a subset, even if you were to do this and say, well, my grid is shifted a little bit inward or a little bit down or whatever, you are still a subset of what's really going on. And so we then said, all right, well, if we all realize we're all just our own little person floating around inside of this grand change grid of life's possibilities, then do we have anything in common, or are we all just our own kind of maverick? And maybe we can find people similar enough to us that we can make connections and we can have relationships and circles and all that sort of a thing. Or is there really nothing that unifies us? And so
I think that's why family was number one, because everybody has to be able to relate to family.
Yeah. Now, interestingly enough, ChatGPT phrases it differently. We'll look at that in just a second. But that's what we want to do is like, is what we share in common that we all started in grid, that we come into the world up grid, or are we all sharing that center spot on the change grid that for all of us, that feeling of peace, that feeling of balance, that feeling of harmony is somehow universal. So this is where everything is safe, everything is secure. You know, you are able to be in the moment, detached from what's going on. There's a certain space there, a clean canvas. I like that, Chris. Yeah. Although when you're at the center, you're certainly aware of everything that's going on around you. You can see it all. But because you're at the center of the change grid, you're detaching from those situations emotionally, intellectually, spiritually, perhaps literally, physically. from whatever they happen to be. Is that what everyone, humanity shares? And I go back to even things like if I say to you, I'm hungry, is hunger a universally shared experience, or do we each have our own definition of what hungry really means? In fact, for all of us that are on this call, have any of us actually ever experienced true hunger? Or is it just a word that we use? You with me on what I'm saying there?
Mm-hmm.
I've
Yeah.
never been starving. I can't think of the longest period of time I've ever gone without abundant food readily available to me. I would really suggest that I know nothing about what actual hunger feels like. Well, if that's true, that it really is more of an abstract experience. We all might experience hunger, but we experience it differently. How many of these beliefs are in that same category? Is there nothing that we can say when it comes to experience X, we all have that in common? That's our question. That's our quest.
Yeah, I'm
So
probably gonna leave here with more questions than answers because
yeah,
this is a big topic. But I can tell you what I do like and what I've been talking about with a lot of groups recently is what you use all the time is this idea of safe, secure, happy, and healthy as kind of a broad uh, way of looking at
yeah,
different kinds of values.
it's more primitive than Maslow. It really is just
Right.
primitive as it.
Because even like I'm working with a health tech company in South Africa. You know, I'm still a citizen of South Africa. So like they say things like they're working with diabetes, which is the second leading cause of death for citizens under 60 because of the urbanization. So this new lifestyle per se. And so they were saying words like food is medicine, food as medicine. I was
Yep.
explaining to them that's going to mean different things in South Africa to different cultures.
Okay.
So, for instance, in my tribe, Zulu, if I say Yukula Kunyamuti, that food is medicine is more like the medicine man. If I said it in Afrikaans, which is Kosis Medicina, that's more of like the subject expert kind of thing.
Ah,
So it's going to be uniquely different in terms of that expression, which means it's going to come across different in terms of the interpretation of what behavior should, facilitate that statement.
Yeah,
And
and
they,
I know that even for people that are, living in the US that are exploring things like better self-care, being more connected to the natural order of things, etc., we also are using that phrase that we need to let our food be our medicine and our medicine be our food.
Mhm.
What we put into our body ultimately creates the body that we have. And so if you don't want to be inflamed, well, then you got to give up sugar. It's just that's because that's causing it. So sometimes taking the food away is medicine. But you're right, that's also a cultural kind of a thing where people are valuing the relationship humans have with the food that they eat.
Mhm.
So, do all cultures do that? Don't really know. Is it a socioeconomic thing? Like one of the things I've always found fascinating is that, well, I was watching a video about the Walmart locations in Chicago that Walmart decided to close. And just prior to at least one of their those decisions being made, the Walmart had been looted. There was some flooding or whatever, and as a result, whatever, it ends up being looted. And it's funny, this gal goes in afterwards and she's producing her own little vlog around the whole kind of thing. And every shelf is empty throughout the whole store, except for fruits and vegetables. They're all
Mm.
there. So no one took fruits and vegetables. So it was just kind of an interesting little commentary on what our culture's mindset is around eating food that's we all know is good for us or whatever.
Right.
So I
Plus,
mean,
if you live in a place where you say that even in America, medicine is food, food is medicine, but you live in a food desert
right.
where the closest place to get food is a gas station, then you can't experience that. And that
That's right.
becomes
In
a
which case,
challenge.
now you're going to turn to actual drugs
Mm-hmm.
Because you can't do the healthy food, the healthy stuff,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And again, so maybe that's another value.
Mm-hmm.
Does all of humanity value health? And again, it might just be idealized. We can all say, yes, we all know that health is, if you don't have your health, you don't have anything. You know, we say these things. Um, but is it something that is simply an ideal for us, or is it something that we actually are practicing?
Mm-hmm.
So there you go. Now, I did want to chat over to everybody this list that I had ChatGPT throw together. So I've just chatted it over to everybody, universalvalues.doc, and you'll see it right here on the screen. So you guys all have that now. Um, so basically what I said to ChatGPT is I would like it to give me a couple of dozen universal human values, and I'd like it to give me a description for what each of those really means, so we can try to understand the difference between them. And then I would like it to rank them from the one that is most essential for humanity to the one that is relatively least. So hopefully it's done that, and that's what we're going to be looking at as we work our way through this. So it would be really nice to see that ChatGPT has done a really good job of this. So ChatGPT, instead of saying family, said preservation of life. Is the first one. And that does feel more instinctual, more primitive. The value of preserving and protecting life has been a common theme across various cultures. While interpretations and definitions of life may differ, the general recognition of its importance can be found in many moral and ethical frameworks. So that seems to me to be right, but rather than thinking of it as being a value that's coming from someone's head, heart, soul, gut, whatever, I think that's more of an instinctive, drive. So for well, they're saying self-preservation. So isn't that going back to fight or flight responses and that?
Yeah,
So
I was gonna say it sounds like nature. That's something natural.
yeah, and so that's kind of going like, well, no, that's just how it is. Well, maybe there is a value that is associated with it, but that just seems to be more of an instinct that we have. Now you get to the next one, concern for the well-being of others. So empathy and concern for the welfare of others have been evident across many cultures, although the extent and application of the value may vary. The idea of showing compassion and avoiding harm to others has been present in diverse societies.
Hmm.
Well, we can certainly think of all kinds of chapters in history where one group decided to harm another group. But was there some other thing that was motivating it that they valued higher than the value they place on concern for the well-being of others? So do two cultures at peace feel concern for the well-being of one another? Tim, that's probably your department. If you
Mhm.
want to unmute and chime in on that one. What do we think? So at rest, if there's no conflict, do people tend to have more concern for the well-being of others?
Uh, that's a tricky one. I think so because I think at that point it becomes the mental energy where people are able to slow down and contemplate and think about what's in front of them. And you sometimes get a different response then versus when the tension is higher and there's not as much mental energy being exerted.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I think that 2 and 3 are uh, uh, natural instincts as well. You often hear that human beings are social creatures. I think that's a natural thing, but when we're too uh, externally influenced, I think it robs us of that capacity to act in that natural way. We see this in families, we see this in organizations, we see this in a lot of different ways. But if you look at kids, they don't have to be told to play together. It's when they're conditioned with certain kinds of
Mm.
frameworks that it puts up this wall. to where they're now looking at externalities and differences. And those are kind of conditioning things.
All right. Mhm. I
Like
think-
even some African tribes still do, I never experienced it, but when something goes awry with a person or between tribes, they get a big circle. So circle always completes
Mhm. Yep.
things, and they say everything that's good about the other
Oh,
as
that's
a simple reminder.
yeah.
But, but you don't see that today. Like today, the behaviors is if you don't believe what I believe, if you're not part of my tribe, I mean, it seems like readily easily go to extremes to bring that forward as opposed to let's, like Tim just said, let's step back, let's see what we have in common.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's absolutely right. And so I think that numbers 2 and 3 do feel like they might hold true within a given collective, but they may not hold true between collectives. So certainly if I've got my tribe as you've characterized it, I may be very concerned about the well-being of other members of my own tribe, but that may not generalize to all tribes. I may not be concerned about their well-being. It might be because I have limited resources and I just want to take care of my own. Then I do that. In social cooperation, same thing. Within my collective, I'd like to be able to cooperate because ultimately this whole social creature behavior is a mating ritual. Some part of the whole, you got to find that partner. And so, so these might be a little bit more within a given collective as opposed to something we generalize across all aspects of a
Right.
society or a planet. Where you look at the next one, a quest for knowledge and understanding. And this one got my attention because I go like, is this something that all humans share in common, that we are curious? Maybe it just goes back to a survival instinct. We have to be able to figure things out so that we can feed ourselves and clothe ourselves and defend ourselves and, whatever it is. But is it just part of a human being that we are natural problem solvers, natural seekers of understanding?
Mm.
I definitely would agree with that. I mean, I look at my grandson who will be 2 next month, and even at that early of an age, there is this curiosity, and he's constantly reaching for things and exploring his surroundings. And I think as we get to be adults, it's the same kind of curiosity. There is a location here in Atlanta, an office complex, and in large letters at the entrance, it says Curiosity Lab.
Oh, nice.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so do you think that is something that's more genetically driven, or is it really a value? I mean, when we're talking about seeing these things happen when children are very, very, very young, their values might be underdeveloped. They might have some sense of values, but certainly they haven't been around long enough for those values to be too locked in place. But if they're curious from infancy, then what is driving that curiosity? Is it a value, or is it simply something that is instinctually part of every human being?
I
Yeah,
think it is that. Go ahead, Brian.
no, you go ahead, Tim.
No, I was just going to say, I do think that it is that quest for knowledge.
Exactly. I think so as well. We just naturally know to do that. You often hear adults say that, oh, I can't be creative, I can't do these things. And I don't think that's necessarily true. I think even Einstein said, we're all born with a certain amount of genius, but life tends to de-genius us. So in
Mm,
other words, the more we keep adding to the picture, the more we keep adding on, we're hindering something. And that's this awakening that I think people are wanting to experience now. People are saying, hey, I'm Zoom fatigue, we need to connect in person, I need to do all these different kinds of things, because these are things that are just natural to the human experience, but we put parameters around them that
mhm.
often ought not to be there, don't have to be there, I should say, even.
I think that's part of brain development. I mean, it's just
Exactly.
it's how we evolved. The same way when Einstein talks about you know, we're born with genius. I mean, you know this, Ryan. We're born with simply more neural networks
Exactly.
as children that then narrow as we develop culture and as we socialize, and we have to form paths that eliminate our capacity to understand everything. And so I think it's just part of the evolution of the brain on the one hand to evolve to broader capacity, and then society narrows that.
Mm.
Well, Kathy, that's the piece that I was about to lean in on. And I think
Mhm.
when I think about organizational structure, it is sometimes these structures and these systems that put a cap on people's curiosity and their willingness or desire to explore and learn. I mean, there are times when people get an opportunity to do something outside of the confines of a job description where we discover that they had talents that we never really knew.
Yeah. Oh, I totally agree with that. I think that we spend more time limiting ourselves than we do expanding. And I think, you know, just culturally, and I mean, I just think it's just the nature of it, of institutions. And it's how man has coped with living among other people, living with other human beings. But it is an interesting thing to explore. Yeah.
So it sounds like then this quest for knowledge, understanding begins at an instinctual kind of level. And then very quickly, it starts to be molded by the culture, actually, probably more often than not by whoever the adults are that are around it, or the influencing factors around them. Yeah, that's really interesting. Okay, how about the next one? And this is why I wanted to separate. I'm glad that the ChatGPT said preservation of life is different than family. So we're number 5 here, respect for family and kinship. The concept of family and kinship has been deeply ingrained in human society throughout history. The importance of familial relationships and the obligations and responsibilities associated with them have been widely recognized. So let me just throw out my personal experience with this. I do believe that I have a family, but my family is Linda, my cat, as some close friends, a few close friends, and my extended professional community. I consider you guys to be closer to family to me than I consider the people who gave me life and the siblings. I'm completely estranged from my family, and I don't feel any loss about that. I never felt connected to them. So I didn't lose anything. It was just never there. And so meanwhile, I hear that, oh, for some people, everything is about family, and, you know, blood's thicker than water, and on and on. It's kind of like, not in my experience. So where's this one coming from? Is this something that's learned, or is it really based on where you were raised? If you were raised in a strong family, maybe you got a different frame around family than I do. Yeah. What do you guys think of that one? Family and kinship.
Well, what's interesting to me is that in organizations, you'll find some attempt to use this to galvanize their employee population. You know, you'll hear companies say we're like a family, and I think that's challenging, but it is something that has been used to try and move organizations towards greater productivity, but I'm not sure that it always is applicable.
Well, right, but even things that I've read about how people get involved with gang activity, it's very often because the gang represents the family that they didn't have otherwise. And so they get attracted into whatever the group is. So they feel like they have something to belong to, and that they're valued, and et cetera, et cetera. And then obviously they've got to stick with the family.
Yeah.
So I go like, I don't know that this idea about respect for family and kinship is something that's truly a universal human value.
Yeah, I think
You're-
it's the experience. It's what you and Tim were just talking about. Because even at work with, after my wife and daughter's accident and becoming a foster parent and advocate for the court, a lot of those kids, although they come from neglect, abandonment, or abuse, they still have this genuine urge and wanting to connect with mom or dad because they just don't understand. But those are the people who put them in the system, but
Mm.
they still want to connect. And then when they do, and they get reunified or whatever the case is, then they're like, nah, I thought that's what I wanted, but no. You guys make me feel, you as a foster parent make me feel more like family. So it says to me they had some kind of vision in their mind of what belonging is or
Yeah.
could be.
Mhm.
And that's what they were looking for. And that's what they'll seek out in like gangs and like Chris put in the chats there, cults,
Cults,
different
yeah.
kinds of
Yep, yep,
things.
yep. Yeah.
I mean, I think respect for family and kinship is universal. It's just a question of how that's directed, you know?
Right. How it's
We all
experienced.
direct it differently. I think the need for belonging is very universal.
Yeah.
Oh, all right. Let's see if that one's on the list.
That's
Yeah.
really
Uh, I really like that, Kathy. That drives it home for me that it's really not as much as family, but it's that need for belonging. Because even people that grow up without families and never knowing who their parents are, that I think what's universal is that need for belonging.
Yeah. Because I grew up with family, but I can tell you, my father and his work, he was emotionally disconnected. So
Mhm.
I never heard my father once, and it's not exaggeration, say I love you.
Oh.
Never heard that from him.
Hmm.
So that's with two parents.
Yeah,
See,
and that happens, that happens a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
now, if the focus here is on respect for a family or a kinship, I can certainly say that when I am exposed to other people's families and family dynamic, I do respect what it is that I'm observing or what I'm participating in as an outsider coming in or whatever. So, is the emphasis on respect or is the emphasis on family? So, yeah, that's an interesting one. Shall we talk about a couple more? Are you guys finding this an interesting little pursuit? So far, the case for truly universal values among humans, the case is not being built very strongly. So we've got preservation of life. That I agree, but we wonder, is that just a genetic thing? And the other one we said we could agree with is that we are curious beings the moment we pop out of the womb. We are already learning, seeking to gain knowledge or whatever. That's happening very, I don't know, instinctually, automatically, whatever. So those two seem like they've got something that could happen right at the. I'm looking for that little bright flash of life at some or light at some point during the development of a human that says, here is your gift of humanity. This is the essential spark that is what makes all humans connected. And hopefully there is something, because otherwise it's a pretty sad commentary, isn't it?
But yeah, I would argue that social cooperation is what allowed man to evolve.
I
You
would
know,
agree. I would agree. But once we get, you know, does that mean maybe the question is at what point do I become a member of humanity?
Hmm.
Do I have to have evolved enough or aged enough that I now have the ability to have some concern for the well-being of other people? Is it social cooperation? That one might come earlier than concern for well-being. I don't really know, but that still feels to me like child development as opposed to popping out of the womb or, you know,
social cooperation allowed early man to survive.
that's right.
Um,
Yeah.
so and over time, social cooperation, whether it's within a tribe or within a certain group, is necessary in order to persist
Hmm.
species,
Yeah. Yep.
right? So whether we value it or not, I don't know, but it is one of those kind of neurological things where if we don't do it, we're doomed.
No, it's absolutely right. Absolutely right. Let's look at what Chris just chatted over to everyone. He put curiosity. There's somewhere curiosity is talked about here. That might be something they've put inside of quest for knowledge and understanding, but I think it's also appears later on in the list. But here goes curiosity. Everyone is born creative. Everyone is given a box of crayons in kindergarten. Then when you hit puberty, they take the crayons away and replace them with dry, uninspiring books on algebra, history, etc. Then suddenly you hit years later with a creative bug. It's just a little voice telling you, I'd like my crayons back, please. Thank you, John Maxwell. All right, so justice
Love
and
that,
fairness.
Chris. Thank you.
That's awesome.
Justice and fairness. Is this something that is essential, or is this a construct? Where is this? Justice and fairness, the concept of justice, fairness, and the idea that individuals should be treated equitably has been present in various legal, moral, and religious systems. While interpretations of what constitutes justice may differ, societies across time have grappled with the notion of fairness in human interactions. So Tim, this is getting back into your DEI kind of world. Justice and fairness, is that something that comes up in your discussions around DEI issues?
Yes, and I'm actually sitting here smiling when I saw this come up on the screen, because in a group chat last week, or just a few days ago, I posted a clip from the governor of Illinois where he was announcing, I think in that state, that basically it was a counter to what Florida has done around books. And my quote was something to the effect of the idea that fairness and equity has to be regulated is just, it's almost laughable.
Yeah,
I think that is a basic human, and I really don't even want to use the word right, but
yeah, no, right.
so this one is interesting to me, that it's on the list like this, because I have a particular feeling about this one.
So do you think fairness is an instinctual sort of a thing for a human, or is it just a construct or an ideal to aspire to?
Well, fairness is one of those neuroscience, part of that SCARF notion of we all share, that the human brain is always looking for fairness somewhere along the line. So, they're looking for fairness, certainty, relatedness, status. And so, I think it is an instinctual kind of human concept that has become a value and then is treated differently across cultures.
I agree, Kathy, and I think what makes this complicated is the idea of power and what we struggle with, as human beings and as groups and subgroups, and that makes this whole issue of fairness very, very difficult to experience.
Yeah.
And do you believe that there is a way that power and fairness can share space? Or is power the removal of fairness from some?
No, I think power and fairness have to share space, ultimately. That is the positive aspect of human, because power, I think, exists. That notion, I think, is also very central to all cultures. There is a concept of power, no matter how you play it out, that humans have, and it's balancing power and fairness that is one of the cultural dilemmas that humans face. That's my 2 cents on that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, I think the question, as we're talking about this more and more, is at what point does someone achieve that status of being a human? Is there an education that has to happen first? And maybe it's like, okay, I know that in Judaism, the whole concept of a bar mitzvah and a bat mitzvah is that at a certain point, you've done your childhood, you've done your learning, you are now ready to be an adult. And so maybe that's where we say, you've been taught, now you need to practice, you need to go out and live these values. So is there something that we're looking for inside of development where there's, I don't know, a ceremony, a tradition, a rite of passage, something that says, now you're a human. Now
So
you're,
remember when we were talking about the different types of power, power over power within,
yeah.
I think in order for this justice and fairness to be experienced by all, it has to come from people's power within. So even though I may have political power or corporate power, whatever bucket it goes in, if my ranking is higher than yours, in order for you to experience justice and fairness in our environment, that for me, it has to come from within. And so when we looked at that and we were looking at how it may overlay on the grid, and we talk about the energies, I think that that's what's going to allow everyone, because what we talk about in the DE&I space is creating organizational environments where everyone can feel that belonging word that Kathy and Chris talked about earlier. And that when people are at that space, then we can anticipate and expect that they would give 100% of their talent to the organization. But people withhold that contribution when they do not feel number 6.
Interesting.
So that's where I talk about 3 Ps, because there's a principle thing in terms of PLE that develops humanity or the human experience. And that's this idea that you have access to something within yourself, this infinite creative power. That should lead to the principle, PAL. What's most important in that development process, right? And then from there, you apply practices to bring that forward. Now, when I was working with the foster care youth back in the States, I created a not-for-profit called Boys into Men, because I seen what happens with these foster care kids when society dub this magical age of 18 and say, you're now an adult. And they didn't have any life skills. And so they go out to the world, and statistically, it shows 3 horrific outcomes for them, which is death, jail, or drugs.
Yep.
Because they just weren't prepared for that. So we created a system to where they can start to develop, but we had to go within, say, what is your narrative that you're working with right now? Let's honor that. And let's develop that so that, again, the principle, PAL, now you can focus on the most important things that will continue to move you forward. Let's create some habits, practices for you to realize that. And
so then, do you think you're teaching them brand new values, or are you reconnecting them with a value that they were born with?
I often say I'm reconnecting them, because I always tell anyone that, I don't offer you anything new per se. I might awaken something, help awaken something that's already in you, but it's not me doing that. Because again, we talked about the human body as being energy and has this energetic and magnetic kind of resonance. And so those things will not resonate with you if they weren't true. It's like the puzzle piece that won't fit. So that's why I've always said for myself, when something captures my attention, like many of these conversations, I leave full with this like curiosity, like what captured? Why did it capture my attention? There's something there to explore. That's why I've always been a journal, to go out and use that as that canvas that Chris was talking about, this blank canvas. Because now I can get to awaken something that's perhaps are lying dormant. And so
and
I don't mind that.
even in the way that you're languaging that, you're referring to it. So there is something that exists and it's already inside of you. It just needs to be awakened.
Yeah, I tend to believe that.
It needs to be developed. If we can really kind of Think about that, focus on that, and just go, what are those things that are already intrinsically a part of every human being? And yeah, it can either be what developed, or it can be, what's the opposite of developed? Subordinated, or whatever the opposite of develop is. What is the opposite of develop?
Deconstruct.
Deconstruct, I'll take that. You know, it could be trained out of you. So I'm just very curious. I find this all fascinating, because honestly, you guys know this, sooner or later, I'm going to say, all right, well, if preservation of life really is something that's core to all humans, where does preservation of life live on the change grid? You know, where on the change grid are we going to be most likely to preserve life? And when it comes to something like a quest for knowledge and understanding, where does that live on the change grid? Because a lot of these other things we're talking about, social cooperation, et cetera, the moment you use the word social, I know I've got to be stepping either in grid towards amiable or up grid towards the more expressive social. These are the social dynamics over here. These are the two people energies, not these two. And so where do these things really live, and what's essential? That's what we want to get into next. So we're at the top of the hour. So you all have this, if you have a moment between now and the next time we chat, you know, do work your way through the list a little bit and see if anything grabs your eye in particular. The next one up is going to be the appreciation for beauty and aesthetics. And obviously that's going to cover a very wide spectrum. What really is beautiful, what really is aesthetically pleasing. It's changed a great deal, doesn't it? So we'll talk
I
about that.
wonder, you know, what you're talking about, that it
Yeah.
that's within
is
it. I wonder, has anyone ever studied that? Because it seems like throughout history, I don't know if Kathy can speak to that, but it seems like throughout history, we've been more fixated on differences and these things that create wars.
Yeah, well, and again,
The anthropologists study that all the time. You know, that's one of the big things we talked about always as anthropologists. What's universal?
what's
For sure.
universal?
Yeah.
And so, but Brian, to your point, the moment you say it's an it, I want to talk to you as a physician and say, can you please isolate the organ where it resides?
I see anyone talking about that chemical, the neurochemical soup, if you will.
Right. Or is it a, I don't know, is there a lump, some microscopic lump somewhere? We go like, that is the essence of humanity. That little lump in someone's brain, that's the essence of humanity.
Yeah. And I would argue spirit.
Yeah.
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 All right.
Exactly.
Okay. So we're done for now. Hopefully, no one dropped off, so at least you found this topic interesting enough to stick around. But you know, we're the circle of brilliance. This is just having conversations like this. We have fulfilled our objectives. So what comes out of these conversations is bonus, but it's the conversations that what's I think really is what's most valuable to our collective here. All right, so thanks everybody. We will talk again very soon. Oh, it's 4th of July weekend, isn't it? Actually,
Yep.
4th of July is next Tuesday. Oh, I don't think we're going to have our call on 4th of July. I mean, I'm not doing anything, but I imagine most people have stuff planned for their 4th of July. So let's plan on skipping next Tuesday. We'll pick up Thursday after the holiday. Okay, so thanks everybody. Take care. Bye.
Have a good day.
Hi, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.